Ask Me Anything stream. Anything at all about EVE Online. Also, we'll go through the news, see what's going on, both with CCP, with EVE Online, in New Eden, what's up with the wars, and all the stuff that surrounds EVE Online. Okay, first let me make some adjustments here. This will only take a minute. Switching to voice activity. Excellent. All right. A couple of announcements. They're not announcements, but just some, I wouldn't know how to characterize these. I guess they're a little bit of updates on Talking in Stations. One is we're a little bit behind on putting the podcast out. We will rectify that by the end of the week and get podcasts out roughly within 12 hours of recording. That way you get the news fresh if you're listening to it on podcasts. I don't want to inconvenience people who really just listen to it rather than find it on YouTube or on Twitch. So we'll get that worked out. And another thing is that we have grown quite big on Discord, and that's not nearly the goal. It's not to be a huge place, it's to be a quality place. So I've noticed that I haven't really moderated it, neither have the guys. I have a crew of about 15 people. It's slowly getting moderated when people are obviously baddies. What's up, Pence fam? So we may start to like clamp down a little bit on moderation. Remains to be seen. We want it to be free and open, and we want banter. There's some things that we want to like make sure that we do to preserve quality, and part of that is to clear out people who are just trying to trigger other people, first of all, and second, we like to complete our thoughts before we hit return, so it doesn't become a staccato. So it doesn't become a staccato layer of people's thinking. Instead, it's more of a let me write a paragraph and then I'll hit return, and then you actually have conversation because people are actually reading your paragraphs. It's weird. I think that there's a whole, I don't know if you know journalism, but you're supposed to write your column in a very, very thin margin. And the reason for that is that somebody looks at that and says, that's easy to read. I'll just eat a little bit more. I'll just read a little bit more. I said eat because I was thinking of tacos. Same example though, like if you serve somebody 2 huge tacos, they'll be like, oh, I can only eat 2 of those, right? But if you, like what they do in Mexico, if you go to like street food, they basically give you these little tiny ones and they just constantly fill them up. And then you eat 14, but on the 14th, when you're really full, you're like, I could do one more. They're tiny. And it's the same thing with journalism. They put it in little columns so that you can read it and feel like I'm not accepting a huge burden to understand the story. There's other tricks that journalism does as well. You front load all the facts in the first few paragraphs in the order of importance and that kind of stuff. So I think what happens with social media is that people do the same thing. They basically write 4 words, go to the next line, write 5 words, go to the next line, write 2 words, and then they just staccato their idea in a top to bottom fashion. And that works. I'm watching it happen here in Chill Stream. Hold on a second. Let's see. Okay, I'll invite some people in. Looks like Laz is here and talking in stations, talking to Keisha. Keisha is a former Razer FC. Laz is obviously from BTEC R fame, and before that, he was a FC for Goonswarm. That's Lazarus Telraven. And yeah, so Apothne's lurking too. I don't know. Talking Station is a great place if you want to see, like, I think kind of influential people of now and the past. You can kind of see them talk to each other inside of talking in stations. That is a great byproduct of inviting quality guests over and over and over again and providing an area where they can talk without feeling like they're in an enemy camp. So talking in stations is a good crossroads, which is really what the whole premise of the title is. Talking in stations was always meant as at first it started as a joke because it was walking in stations, but we'll say talking in stations since it's a talk show. And we're all fans of walking in stations and ambulation, those key buzzwords before they were destroyed by the Incarnate expansion, and everybody said, "Oh, I never wanted that in the first place." Well, we did. We wanted to walk around and, get off the ship and walk around and meet each other and stuff like that. So we were fans of that. But talking in stations ended up being a crossroads for a lot of players from different areas where they didn't feel again like they were in a place where they were going to be censored for saying controversial things. So that we want to preserve. That's quality. We want people to be able to talk and discuss their ideas and not feel like doing that is going to get them compromised. But there is a fine line. Discussion's great. Triggering people is not. So if you come to fight, you've come to the wrong place, and we will start to look at that and probably start to crack down a little bit. Okay, I want to say hello and good morning to you guys. It's morning for me here on West Coast in Los Angeles. So let's have a look at what's going on out there. So I was looking at talking in stations. If you haven't caught already, we have the logistic lines of alliances, which was last Thursday's show. Really, really good, very evergreen, and I recommend it if you ever wanted to know what the logistics are like for alliances. This is a good show to listen to. We picked up Dunk Dinkle, who does logistics for Brave Newbies, Nydia Masters from Pandemic Horde, and Panda Solette from Roving Guns. Actually, that's Pandemic Legion. And so they discuss what logistics are like on an alliance level. That was a U.S. show. These Thursday shows are U.S. shows, basically, because they happen after hours U.S. time zone. So most of those guys are probably American or North American, could be Canadian. So check that out. And then also on Talking in Stations, we will have the Sunday show, which was really good, actually. That will be up today. And then tomorrow, we will have the latest on wormholes with Exuki's show. That was the whole story. That'll be up tomorrow. So look out for those 2 episodes coming at you. Oh, is that a Pothney in here? Uh-oh, gotta unmute. Hi, guys.
What up?
Hello, Zanuria. You guys are live, so be
Yes,
nice.
best behavior and all that.
All that.
I do have a question for you about your CSM candidacy, if it's okay.
Sure.
If I can ask
Maybe
that.
we can
So
both answer it.
a lot of people have been trying to squirrel away votes and saying, well, I've got this many thousand people who have promised me that they're going to put me in 1 or 2 slot or whatever. I have this many people. Have you gotten to a point yet where you have a number, hypothetical or otherwise, of how many first slot votes you expect to get at a minimum?
No. As a fellow candidate, Zanuria, you're running for CSM 14 as well. Do you?
I expect to get at least 8% of the vote like I did last year, but I'm also expecting to get somewhere upwards between 300 and 500 additional first spot votes, which I'm hoping will be enough to push me above the mountain of candidates that is currently.
So describe that mountain for listeners. What's that look like?
It's kind of crazy. There's a lot of interest in the CSM because there's been a lot of headlines, some good, some bad. There's been scandals, and anytime there's any kind of anything, everyone who can put the 3 letters together says, you know what, I can fix this. I'm gonna run, and then you have all these trenders who sort of run. And then the problem is that it exhausts the voter base, because the voter base doesn't want to listen to an interview for 50 different people. They don't want to read about 50 different people. They want to read about 10 or 15 different people. So it drives turnout down and pretty much guarantees that null-sec entities like Goon Swarm can get all their people on.
That's interesting. Apothany, you ran for CSM at one point, right?
Yeah. For CSM 11, I think I had the most ballot appearances and was the third best performing candidate after Arith and Hyde.
That's impressive.
Yeah, but you couldn't take your seat for real life reasons, right?
Yeah. I had some fairly serious health problems that happened in the March. So I decided that rather than and this is before we knew the vote results. So I got in contact with CCP Logibro, who was managing it at the time, and said, "Hey, I'd like to remove myself just because I know that I can't do the job as well as I want to." And then because of the way STV works, that's just that didn't really impact the vote much. Basically, the worst effect it would have is that if somebody filled out all 14 votes, and I was one of them, they would have been able to put up 13 votes because I took up a slot, but it didn't. But it obviously meant if I was first on someone's ballot, and then someone else was second, their second person immediately became first at the very beginning of the vote.
Yeah. That's the voting system that CCP uses for this election.
I think it's a way better system than what they had, but I also think that the whole point of single transferable vote is to prevent certain groups from getting too many of their people on. But if there's no competition for those groups, it doesn't prevent them from getting all their people on.
And
Yeah.
I think that's true regardless of what system you run, realistically. Like
Yeah.
if it's only people from null-sec that elect to vote in any significant numbers, regardless of system, it always is going to be to some extent based on number of votes, and therefore, if you can throw 1,000 people at the problem, then the problem gets solved, as we see in Wide Read as well.
Let me paint for you a hypothetical situation. Let's say I'm the Matani, and let's say I want only goons on the CSM, hypothetically speaking. If that's what I want, it's in my best interest to encourage as many random high sec pubbies to run and be considered official candidates as possible. Like everybody, the kitchen sink of candidates, because that is going to mean the highest amount of efficacy for my horse trades with other null-sec alliances and coalitions. It's going to mean that my votes are going to hit more because everyone else is going to be spreading their vote between 20 or 30 people. And there's a minimum threshold with this system that you need to hit. Otherwise, you cannot be put onto the CSM.
What's that minimum? That's the hump you were talking about, right? That mountain.
Yeah, well, I typically get past the minimum. It's just there's people in front of me like Vince Draken, or TikTok Tazik, who get just a few hundred more votes, and then they would have gotten on if people in front of them didn't get more votes than them. Getting over the mountain is easy if you're an established candidate, but those 20 votes here, 30 votes there that are going to people that think that the CSM is some kind of 5-star luxury, all expenses paid vacation to Iceland, those are the people that are killing me. Those are the people that are going to kill you in terms of your candidacy or potential candidacy.
Yeah. We're all potential candidates because the actual list of people who qualified, did the paperwork right, and all that kind of stuff actually comes out this weekend at Eve Down Under. So we'll know actually who's on the list and then be able to, well, as far as TIS is concerned, be able to publish those interviews and gather those interviews for publication in I think it's 2 weeks of campaigning before the voting starts.
I anticipate a lot of shenaniganery and high grade hokum and buffoonery.
Why do you think that?
I think that okay, so there's never been a time where there's a CSM election and then I say, you know what, next year is going to be calm, relaxed, level headed, rational. I've never said that because that's never been the case. It's always been, all right, how can we turn this up to the nth degree? because that's just how this community works when it comes to the CSM election process.
Everybody enjoys the circus and the gladiator games, and by everyone I mean, you know, the people who do upvotes and updoots on Reddit, and then that's what we see. But with regards to what you're saying about kind of acquiring these null-sec votes or acquiring a couple first places here, while I absolutely believe that it is extraordinarily valuable and vote winning to play that game, I think that it is entirely possible to not play that game and just on yourself be a good candidate and focus on that. And I think if you do that well, and if people believe in you, then you can overcome that. And that might be biased because that's the type of one I did for the CSM. I think the only ballot I appeared on was the Goon one at like 12th, which
12.
which certainly increased my overall ballot appearances, but likely made very little impact on my shot, as it were, as there are obviously many people between myself and their top that didn't get on.
But the problem is that now it's not 14 seats anymore; it's 10, and that changes the math in a very strong way. That makes it that much harder for non-affiliated people like myself to get on. It was easier before for the Apothenes and the Matteralls of Eve to get elected to the CSM when there was more seats, because the math of single transferable vote accounts for how many seats there are. Now that there's 10, there's maybe a 9th seat and a 10th seat that people who aren't on a block ballot somewhere have a chance of getting on.
Well, in my case, I was third, so I would have got on either. But my point is that I still believe that if you have a strong body of work and you have put yourself out there before campaign season, then and you are already to some extent known and respected, if you can come in as a strong candidate, then while obviously it helps, it is certainly not necessary to have that big null-sec backing. And obviously it was a advantage to those people, but I don't think it's the be-all and end-all of the CSM.
What's a body of work mean to you?
Well, by body of work, I mean, think of everything you've ever done that has impacted the EVE Online community, be that one person or 5,000 people. So, to be just fully narcissistic and use my own example, I would consider my current body of work in the EVE community to be all the Alliance tournament stuff I did, all the fleets I ran in Waffles and in EVE University back in the day. And obviously, the older it is, the less it matters. All the articles I wrote for Crossing Zebras, all the podcast appearances I used to do. And I think that if you are going to be a strong candidate, especially if you don't have that null-sec backing, if you do not have a strong and at least somewhat respected body of work before you even think about becoming a CSM, then you are basically you are very much diminished in your hopes, because you want to be able to say to the voters, say, hey, I'm not just doing publicity now because I want to be on the CSM. I've had these thoughts, I've had these opinions, and I've been putting myself out there and doing work for the community for X many years. So you already know everything about me. You've already seen my propaganda. You have already seen my advertising, because it has been out there for 3 years through this other stuff done. So you don't need that person to listen to an interview with what you believe in and what you're already about, because they've already been hearing it for the past 3 years to some extent.
That only helps if your body of work is something that is relevant or applicable to people. Most people don't really give two hoots about my CSM reform, because those people might not even know what the CSM is, or even think that the CSM does anything. Or if they think that the CSM does anything, they might think, oh, those B guys, those Goonies, they control everything. It's hopeless. Why bother voting? So there's a way in which that can work against you.
Well, that obviously depends on how how broadly your body of work affects people. Focusing on a CSM reform issue such as yours, that is going to be of interest and looked into by people who are very hyper-focused on the CSM and take great interest in the CSM, which, as you've said yourself, is quite a small marketplace, whereas things that have much more publicity affect a wider number of people. So it's not only having a solid body of work, it's having a body of work that has made the rounds that people have seen. So, like, I used to write articles on ship fitting and fleet combat, which is a much broader, of much broader appeal. That's no commentary on the quality or relevance of either
for
topic.
sure.
Just
You have
saying
name
that it's
recognition
broader.
for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But
Well,
is that enough though? Is that enough when you have this many different people who also have name recognition?
Well, all I can say is that it was, and I think that it is still a valid tactic if you have that broad body of work backing you, and I think that is in terms of what makes a good CSM. I think that body of work doesn't prove, but it implies that that person is committed to the community, is capable of organizing their thoughts, and it is a asset to look for in the CSM candidate.
Okay, one more thing before we can come back and forth on this topic all day long, all week long. That's what it's for. These chill streams or ask me anythings for people if they want to ask questions. But I want to get back to something you said at Pothney that was interesting to me. You said, like, you have to do the work, and the work is leading a bunch of fleets, and then on the other hand, writing articles, appearances in front of a lot of people at CCP headquarters when you're, what do you call it, chat streaming, or where you're commentating on a tournament. Like, that's high profile stuff. Is there a difference between doing work in the game as opposed to doing work out of the game?
I think for this purpose,
For visibility.
I think for visibility, it doesn't matter. Like, you could be, you could be a fuzzy Steve. You could do a lot of dev stuff that a lot of people use, and you've produced all these cool industry tools, and just be a generally nice guy. And that in and of itself, that is his body of work that people know about before they listen to an interview.
He has a website that has tools for industrialists and for basically all players. So that's a constant reminder of who he is and what he's done for you for free.
Exactly. And it shows some level of competence as well. And you might take, for example, to go a bit more old school, if you think of Azawal Skull, if you remember him, the Eve Altruist, I think it was, that website, where he did a bunch of fitting stuff, and he really knew his ships and his fittings. He was a solo PvPer and small game PvPer and Agony, and he had his website and he had his stuff. But even without that, even if you just focus on the in-game stuff, if you have a person who day in day out FCs for your coalition or for your alliance or for your corp or whatever, that coalition, alliance, corp, and the people who have been fighting them and know that FC, that is someone who is present in their mind as part of the game. So if you think of the entirety of every single player, every single thing that happens, not every player interacts with every single other part of the game. So if you think of all players and all events as a series of nodes, and yourself as a node, each interaction you have with a person or a thing that happened is an edge. So you have your kind of your own net, your own set of what the game is to you. So, for example, I've never done anything in the drone regions. I don't know anyone in the drone regions. So the drone regions, effectively, while it may directly impact my game, as All Leave does, it is not directly effective to me. Mm-hmm. So you've got to think about the set of people and the set of events that you interact with or affect, and that will be the set of players who are aware of your existence, who know what you're about, and already have access to that body of work I mentioned previously.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. So the Zenuria question about have you already vote counted so that you can get over that initial hump? I haven't done any vote counting. This is the first time I'm running a campaign. I've seen them run many times, interviewed candidates many times, and I've seen a lot of strategies come and go. So I'm not really doing any of the stuff I've seen before. even if they're best practices for how to win a campaign. I don't know if that answers your question, but the point is I'm not really doing what most candidates do. And I don't know if that'll work or not, but that's where it's at.
I do sometimes get concerned when I see CM campaigns that are very focused on the votes almost.
Mm-hmm.
It's like your entire campaign is about getting on the CSM. And then when you get on the CSM, you spent past 6 months trying to get on the CSM, and you are 6 months out of date with the things you now need to be talking about and doing.
Yeah.
So which is one of the reasons why, as I've mentioned, I prefer a more, you might almost say, more organic thing. Like, do the thing in game you are interested in,
Yeah.
do it as well as possible, produce content about that thing, acquire votes that way, and then when you get on the CSM, people know what you've got on there to do, and it is your special subject or your focus. And special subject might not be an in-game thing. For example, yourself, Matterall, I see as someone with a lot of experience in like PR stuff. So oftentimes we know that the CSM will help like write dev blogs or help CCP with like how to um, direct certain information at the players in certain ways. So that would be, for example, one of your specialist areas.
Yeah. The messaging. Right. Yeah, I suspect that's.
You got to have at least one guy who's experienced spin firsthand.
Well, it's not internal messaging. Like, you can have all the tribal warfare you want, and that's fine. That's fun, right? You see a lot of the propaganda. You see a lot of the messaging from one alliance to another, one coalition to another, the narratives of why you are in conflict, who the good guys are, who the bad guys are. That's all natural to the game. What's odd is occasionally CCP kind of steps into it. They don't mean to. I know they don't mean to, but they kind of do. And it's a weird balance of how much are you a referee and you don't call out, you don't name and shame anyone. The two examples that I can think of recently, of course, are the Brisk Ball. They gave too much information about what had gone on and who was responsible for it, with not any more information on any proof or evidence. So that kind of left the people who were accused in a tough spot, because they've got accused publicly and were not able to see any evidence or be communicated with until enough pressure was brought to bear that CCP said, let's review this. And then they ended up saying, we need to reverse this decision. It was a coincidence or something. And so that was a mistake. And then on the heels of that, a different CCPer from the security team names and shames botters that are coming on. And at first, there was one wave of bans for botters that was anonymous, just said, we've picked up people, don't do this sort of thing. And then the second one came a few weeks later, and that said, hey, we've banned people from the Imperium renters and fraternity renters. And watch out, guys, because we're coming after you. And then you saw a fraternity side say, well, wait a minute, you named and shamed us both, but we may not be equal. They might have 100 and we might have 10. So in the form of Elo Knight tweeting back to the CCP developer, Peligro, Peligro then releases basically a pie chart, and the pie chart shows the top 25 alliances that have banned players in it. And so that creates a lot of, now you've named and shamed 25 groups. And so in a strange way, CCP, instead of completely staying out of the tribalism and stuff, their messaging was to be more authentic, was to be more real, to give more information to the players, to really kind of bond with the players, to say, like, we're doing things for you. We're attacking botting. We're attacking corruption. And that kind of engagement has actually worked against them. It's a very strange thing. I think they're trying to do something, but the players, or maybe sections of players, not all of them, are resistant and blaming CCP for getting involved in the first place.
I mean, I think, there's obviously when CCP say, hey, we've just banned a ton of botters, or we are currently working on banning a ton of botters, but we can't say who it is, when the bans are, or anything. That's not very satisfying to the bloodthirsty masses. However, if you swing in the opposite direction, you say, we have banned 800 Imperium bots. Get fucked. Don't bot. That's the two extremes. My personal preference for somebody in that referee position is when they just do statistics. So I think the top 25 breakdown, that is much more objective and fair than saying these two groups and we have no context for whether the biggest spotter or the least spotters.
Mm-hmm.
If you just give non-cherry picked data that is safe to release to the player base, I think that strikes a good balance between proving that you are doing a lot of work rather than just saying, hey, we're working on botters, and giving a bit of satisfaction without necessarily playing favorites. And if you just give the data, you would hope that people would contextually be able to work out. So, for example, given that the Imperium is, and I haven't been in the game for like a year, so correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah,
given
sure.
that the Imperium is functionally the largest group of players in the game, and a group that has a lot of industry, you would expect them, if bots are evenly distributed among the entire game, them to have the most bots, just because they have the most people. Like if each account has a 1 in 1,000 chance of being a bot, the group with the most people has the most bots, just by basic math, right?
Yeah.
So I don't think that that's inherently unfair. But when it's kind of cherry picked data or given out of context, then even if it's well-meaning, it can lead to people reading into stuff. And then this does not apply to the brisk stuff, which was just really, really dumb. But it's also the case where when they are, God of the game, people will often read into what CCP do far more than CCP would ever intend. And the CCP has to be super mega careful about that, right? So it's kind of that common joke about, you're in an English lecture at university, and your lecturer is saying, we're looking at this book today, and in this book, there's this sentence that says that the curtains were a pale green. And the author will go, well, clearly this refers to the fact that the protagonist is feeling kind of ill at the moment, they had a cold, and it's a reflection of that. And then somebody sticks their hand up and they say, what if the author just meant that the curtains were green? And they say, no, you've got to read into it more, trust me. And they go, well, actually, I'm the author, and I meant that the curtains were just green. So, there is to some extent where people are just going to inherently read into more than what CCP intended to. But part of the messaging skill is trying to figure out what people are going to read into and being able to message very carefully and very diplomatically so that you always have this appearance of impartiality. But people are always going to, infer things from what you say that you don't necessarily mean.
Yeah, and when we say, like, the community says or people say, we don't know what everybody thinks. It's just maybe a small portion of people saying one thing, and then a few days later, another group says a different thing. And then you say, like, well, the players are, the players can't make up their mind. Well, that's not necessarily true, because the first group made up their mind. You just heard from a different group the second time. They're all players, but they are different factions inside the player group. So when we say that, people are angry at CCP, that's a certain select group of people that are angry at CCP. I'll give you a historical example. There was a player who was basically a news personality named Mintchip, LOL, right? If you guys remember her, you'll see some groans. And those are unfair, by the way. But you'll see some groans from people because she was like a little sprite character, and she got into PL, and there was probably a lot of jealousy about, wait, she's just got into this game and now she's in PL, and it's just because she's a cute little news girl or whatever. So that followed her around quite a bit, and she essentially got kind of chased out of the game because to be a personality in EVE Online without having been here a long time, there's a lot of resistance to that, especially if you get in by virtue of being a female or a beautiful female. Well, anyway, she comes around after she's disappeared for a while and ends up becoming, for a different game that CCP owned, Dust 514, she becomes a dev for that a community person for that. And she was very well suited because she was, again, kind of ahead of the curve, making a lot of newsreel stuff for YouTube about EVE Online. And there was a thread knot of over, 400 messages, I think. Terrible, terrible onslaught of players just saying, no, no, no. She said Eve sucked. She does not deserve to work for CCP. We don't know what you're up to, CCP, but you're making terrible decisions. And there was just a huge amount of community anger. It turns out it was only 11 people on alts. That's CCP looked into it, and it was only 11 people making a thread knot. So when we think that the community is outraged or there is a big to-do about a thing, you keep that in mind, that players have the ability to scale themselves in this game much bigger than in other games, using alts.
I mean, we
so
had
on.
Russian troll bot farms doing politics before the Russians did.
Yeah. Yeah, so a bit about Mintchip. Was she an avid PvP player? I don't actually know what she did in the game at all. She may have been very active, but I don't know. But anyway,
I do find it amusing, very briefly.
Go ahead.
For all the shit people say about PL and how they're garbage to Alliance, blah 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 blah. And I don't know if that's changed in the past year. I doubt it. Like they've always been kind of like you love to hate it, right?
No,
but it's
last
still,
show it was worse than ever. But go ahead.
If somebody joins PL, it is still like, oh, but are they good enough to join PL? Oh, have they earned their chops to join PL? Even if you're not a PL. Whereas, like, there are a ton of people who join PL because they did a bunch of stuff and basically earned, in inverted commas, their plus. So, like, getting FCs from other alliances. But equally, if somebody has a friend and they can vouch that they're not awful, they can join PL. Like, I mean, I assume that's still the case. So it's like people still hold PL to this standard that they say that they don't anymore. And I always found that very amusing, kind of like what the outside narrative on PL was. And I assume that's true for any, well-known group. For example, Matani probably finds it quite amusing what people outside see of goons and the hypocrisy and what they say about that and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Well, but I do want to answer some questions here, and I will. So stay tuned for the answers to your questions. I am looking at them and writing them down over here. But Apothny, I think
I can go away if you want.
No, I want you to stay. You're great. And I want to take on this topic too. PL did have a time, and I think it was Shadu who kind of picked up like celebrities, right? If somebody was popular or interesting in some way, they would kind of say, yeah, you can join. It was kind of like you had like a celebrity pass for certain places.
I think that's partially true, but I think it's also the case that oftentimes people get celebrity in EVE because they are good at doing a thing. And so it is not so like they may have been hired, maybe the celebrity is good, maybe that's great, but they also are a celebrity because they're an amazing FC or they're an amazing scout or they're amazing, whatever.
Right, but I think when people aren't really good at the game, let's say, they're just popular because they're a writer or a news personality or a video girl, or what do you call those? Streamer girl?
I think that can often be the case of because PL has and had people who are part of kind of the media circus. Like you know personally that a lot of people who do EVE media just kind of end up knowing each other and becoming friends. Like, for example, while you're an NC and I was in PL, we didn't know each other because we knew each other because we both did EVE media stuff. And it was like, hey, do you want to come to this podcast? Hey, do you want to do this stuff? And thus the people in PL who do media meet the other people in the game who do media and therefore become friends and therefore like, hey, do you want to join PL? I enjoy hanging out with you. While, I'm not arguing that celebrity has never been involved. Like I can't speak to that at all. I have never been in charge of PL recruiting practices. I've only vouched like 2 people into PL, and neither of them were EVE celebrities. So like that I think that exclusively blaming it on celebrity is like kind of not quite right.
Well, yeah, and the thing is, it may be like, as you're describing, a personal thing. Like, say it may be one corporation in PL that does that, or who knows. But anyway, that's been it's kind of a sore spot of some, jealousy from players who are kind of slogging it out on their own, quietly trying to build up their kill board, and this is maybe a model of the past. Who knows? Like, this could be something that people don't really care about anymore. But anyway, so that's what happened. And all that to say that when it looks like, the entire game population is mad about a thing like CCP getting involved in tribal politics inside the game and taking sides, that it may not be all the people getting mad about that. But yes, again, the messaging that CCP needs to do with players could probably be improved every single time. I don't know about you guys, but every day we get spam calls in the United States where it's a call that's just trying to sell you something, some kind of automated call.
I get it once every. It varies. Sometimes I get it once every 2 months, or sometimes I get like once a week, where it's this female robot voice that says, "So we've heard you've been in a car accident recently. Is that right?" And it's like, no, no, I have not.
Okay, so, and the reason in the U.S. that it's like that, by the way, is blocking callers is hard, but you have to keep doing it every time because they're calling from different numbers all the time. And the reason they got away from that, they said, yeah, that's illegal. You can't do that cross state lines. So you can only do that inside of the state. So the state can call you to try to raise money or do whatever. I mean, people inside your state. So what has happened is people from a different state will use Google Call or whatever and call from a local number in California, even though they're not from California. So they're just getting around that law like it's nobody's business. It's kind of a hot topic right now in government.
Well, lawmakers are and always have been so incredibly far behind technology. It's
so
insane.
far.
Because like if you remember the Zuckerberg interview, it's like,
well,
the people who, like, I think you would struggle to find, if we think of your average senator, right? So they are male, 50s, white hair, like that would be a stereotype for a US senator, I think. So how competent is your granddad on, or even your father if you're in your 20s or your 30s, on like the cutting edge of computing solutions? Like it's still very much and always has been, may always continue to be, because it's such a rapidly developing world, a young person's game. But it is not young people who are making these laws for a host of very good reasons. So law and tech is always going to be a very, very difficult thing until we find another way to do it.
Yeah. Well, I may disagree with you to some respect because you have physicists and you have technology people inside the House of the lower house for us, the House of Representatives. The senators are a little more aged, I think. But anyway, let me avoid getting too far into those weeds and just get to some questions here because I feel like I've kept Crazy Dog waiting a long, long time. And then there's a few more questions after that. But he asks, what change or how important do you think it is that the CSM do or do not have people from different parts of big null-sec groups of the game that are represented? Does it matter if 70% of the members of CSM are from goons or another big group? Yeah, I think it matters tremendously. In fact, my whole reason for running is because I do think that's important. And here's what I've said before in all my writing, and you'll hear it in interviews. I've recorded 2 that are going to be coming out right after this weekend. And that is that you need somebody in the room that is not just a junior, what I would consider kind of a junior developer. Like these guys are great. I'm not taking anything away from them. These CSM members that know their stuff, like Sutonia, an amazing person who knows a lot about the intricacies of the game. And I don't even think he's limited to that, but they really know the game in a way that a developer would know the game, like how to balance things and how what's working and what's not working and these sorts of things. And you need those kinds of people inside of the CSM for sure. You also have null-sec guys in there. Of course, you're going to have a lot of those this time around because they've gotten really good at figuring out how to use the system for their benefit. In other words, they trade votes. So if I have 1,000 guys voting for me and Apotny has 800 voting for him, sorry, he gave you less. We basically say, I'll put you second on my ballot. You put me second on your ballot, and we'll swap. And so we can ensure that at least for the non-thinking voter or the very, very do what you're told voter, I don't know a nice way to say that, right? But you're giving something and you just kind of vote. You're not actually voting your own knowledge. You're voting whatever you're given to do. The automatic voters, basically. That's a lot of votes that you cannot prevent. And now you have 2 seats taken up instead of just 1. So if you multiply that by however many big coalitions there are and they trade votes with one another, you're going to get a good percentage. I think we calculated 7 or 8 out of 10 are going to be null-sec people, basically. And okay, so what's the big deal? Because when you had null-sec in the last 2 years, they did the war deck changes, right? And they did, they did some stuff for SOV, null-sec that kind of hurt, or I don't know if CSM did this, but they kind of let it pass without too much of fanfare. A change to Hicks, I believe, that wormholers used one way and null-secers used a different way. And to fix a problem for null-sec, they kind of sacrificed wormhole gameplay. And although they said that CCP said, we'll take care of wormholers after we take care of this, that message didn't get communicated out well enough. And I think wormholers were really mad about that. They felt like their gameplay was being sacrificed for null-sec. So there's a concrete example of null-sec kind of fixing things for themselves, at least putting pressure on CCP to fix things for that kind of gameplay, that large-scale gameplay, which affects a lot of players, without really saying, okay, well, you can't fix it that way because wormholers are going to suffer. Now, I'm not blaming CSM for that, but that's just the nature of your parameters. You come in and you see things a certain way. All the players that are coming from null-sec are genuinely attracted to null-sec gameplay. They do other things too, but they're attracted to null-sec gameplay. I think a lot of them think that this game is all about epic battles and stuff that's, headline grabbing. I just talked to Sapporo Jones, who very much reinforces that. You know what we need to do this game? This is what he says. I'm quoting him. We need to get players out of high sec because, high sec is not where they should be, and they need to come into null sec. And all we need to do is get those players into null sec because you know what? The only thing people care about outside this game are the big battles, the epic gameplay. And that's exactly what Sion said 3 CSMs ago. He was saying, look, we know that people like epic gameplay, big epic gameplay. So that is the mindset, basically, of players that come from null-sec, at least the high-profile players. Of course, they can expand from that. They can say, look, there's definitely a genuine problem with new player retention, and they can talk about the sorts of things that work out there. Aerith is particularly good at that, but so is Anominate and other people. Even though they come from null-sec, they can talk about war deck mechanics needing to be changed, maybe because Goonswarm, I don't know if Goonswarm uses war deck mechanics or anything like that, but the point is that they're very capable of speaking on other issues, but I don't think they can escape the mind frame that they're in. And that's what I worry about. It's not just what they have in mind, and it's not what they come to CCP with. It's how they react to CCP's development path, because CCP basically says, this is what we have in mind. We're thinking of going in this direction. Or they say, here's this new thing that we got, and we want to, put it out there. Another example that happened in this last year, when they introduced Abyssal Space to the CSM, they basically said, the CSM said, "Oh no! You can't let people run these sites in high-sec without somebody being able to interfere with them, somebody being able to take the loot that they got." Now that for this CSM was a very natural thing, right? You can't run the higher level abyssal sites without the ability to be pirated, because you need to have that risk versus reward in high sec. Or I think it had to do with Concord. I don't know. But the point was that they added something to something CCP had designed, and CCP later rescinded that idea. I mean, they launched it with CSM's idea attached to it, and nobody was running those sites. And then a few months later, CCP said, okay, we're taking off that restriction that CSM wanted. And I don't think they've reported the results to that, but it seems like CCP's happier the way they originally designed it without the high-sec interference of the null-sec CSM, if you get what I'm saying. Now, I'm trying to characterize it from my perspective as fairly as I can, and anybody who's in the CSM might be able to explain it more clear in what happened without being defensive about it, maybe. But that is why I think you need somebody in the room, or some bodies in the room, not just one person, but you need people who are like, it's not just about this epic gameplay, guys. You know, there's stuff that's imaginative beyond the kind of stuff you're capable of imagining. For instance, I use these examples, the sailing around the world of Katya Sia, right? Like, is that gameplay that they would have said is essential? Probably not. But that is something that was not only rewarded in the game with a gigantic statue, unlike we've seen ever in EVE Online for a player, but it was rewarded with stories out in the press as well. And so you can reach the imagination of people who watch and read about EVE Online with interesting stuff that's not just about giant epic battles. Because we're about to go into a war, and I'm afraid this war is going to be pretty boring, frankly. You're going to see a lot of destruction of tribute from the Imperium, but it's kind of like World War B Casino War, where it wasn't, it was reported heavily and it got all the press and everything else, but it really was not an exciting war. I was on the winning side that time. I'm going to be on the getting battered side this time. And either way, I'm not very excited about these kinds of wars. They just don't seem very interesting. We shall see. So I hope
So
that...
if I can...
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah, please, break in.
Sorry, I wrote down a couple things as you were talking, so I have a couple points, if that's all right.
Yeah, of course.
So the first point you mentioned, using Sueternia as an example, as kind of a junior developer, and you characterized as it's basically having another dev in the room. And I think that is a mischaracterization in that the CCP devs don't get to play with the tools they are making as much as someone like Sueternia does. So my experience of speaking to CCPers and kind of what they put out is that CCP have a ton of data, and many of the devs were previously very experienced players, but they don't have a data scientist who can really do a lot with those statistics. So you may have a dev who has a very good working knowledge of solo PvP or whatever, and that might be your CCP Fozzies, your CCP Rises, whoever, and they have very good ideas and very good stuff. But someone like Sueternia is someone who is playing the game more than somebody with a full-time job at CCP necessarily can or would want to, right? So I think that they do definitely bring in a different perspective to another dev, somebody who's got the real hands-on experience of the game, more so necessarily than a dev does. I think that you are absolutely right. You don't just want all those players in who are the pure mechanical subject matter experts, but I do not think that they are a junior dev.
That's my derogatory term for them. It's not an actual description, but it's kind of like, let's talk about balancing this game. Like, that's who you talk to, right?
Yeah. So the second thing I would say is that if you have a null-sec dominated CSM, and you have say Goon's got 7 of the 10 positions, just as the classic example. I think that CC peers are intelligent enough to recognize the context, right?
Mhm.
So people who work on the game, especially the frontline devs, are aware enough of the game to know that if they are talking to a goon or to a PL member or whoever they are, that they are coming from that background. And I've heard enough stories of players from various groups coming onto the CSM espousing certain opinions that are quite transparently just from their group or just what they personally believe and
Yeah.
no backup. And they basically get ignored for the remaining 11 months because they have no valued input, right?
Right.
Maybe ignored is too strong a word, but like
I get it.
PR, they
Well,
they have a decent bullshit tar.
In
then
that sense, though, let me interrupt you there. In that sense, I've never said that electing 5 or 6 guys from Goon Swarm is a problem. I've never said that. I've never said 5 guys from NCPL and 5 guys from Goon Swarm is a problem at all. It's not their tribe. You're electing players, right? So this is all CSM is when people show up to CSM, most of them, any good CSM is going to show up as a player, as an advanced player to talk about the game to CCP. But I do think there is a problem with what gameplay they favor. If too many people are coming from the same gameplay, and I separated.
So I think it devalues the CSM. It makes the CSM less useful to CCP if they don't have that diversity.
Well, let me ask you this though: is it not bad for the game? And has this actually happened? Where if you get people coming in for a thing, like let's say it's a game about PvP and mostly small and large scale PvP. That's what EVE's about. That's what people come to play. So the CSM arrives with that pressure. And CCP says, okay, we're going to rebalance over and over again the ships. Have we created our own momentum in that direction?
Well, I think... Ooh, that was... Okay. So I think that you are right to an extent, in that I would say that in a very broad sense, EVE Online is an inherently PvP game in that everything a player does interacts every other player. So it is not, I go away into a room, I do a thing, and I come back, and at no point does what I do in that room ever affect any other player ever. Because it always does, even in the most direct sense. And I think that the natural response to Abyssal sites was that this looks like that thing. That it is a thing that does not affect other people, and it removes that interconnectivity. Like your own criticism of the Alliance tournament, one of the things you often say is that it is too completely removed from the game. And I think that was the initial criticism as the Abyssal site, is that it's turning it into instance PvE. But I'd also, one final point before we continue, is you mentioned the epic gameplay and promising that epic gameplay. And I think that is part of the game, but I think that selling EVE Online as this place of epic space battles is a lie, or possibly a partial truth, right? Because anybody who's been involved in null-sec for long enough knows that you do have these giant wars, and these epic battles do happen 4 times a year. So if you are selling a player epic battles and giant fun wars, you are not selling them EVE Online. You are selling them EVE Online maybe 2 months of the year. And I think that if your marketing strategy as a person, not necessarily a CC, is focused towards that's where advertising for your alliance, then you are attracting people who are not actually interested in the game. So I think that you should be very objective and realistic about what it is you do in the game and what it is you enjoy in the game. And if that is the epic space battles, that's great. But I think that there are probably very few players who are only in the game for those epic space battles and don't log in apart from there's a huge fight. Or rather, if they do, that is not the big recurring subbing for a long time players that we're looking for, who are going to be those long-term players. It's people who get put into the community. It's the people who enjoy doing the downtime thing. So people who enjoy doing logistics, or people who enjoy running those smaller roams, or people who enjoy doing the industry, people who enjoy doing wormhole stuff, people who enjoy doing, like, if you think realistically about what portion of your time spent playing Eve is spent on what portion of things, that might be a more truthful thing about Eve. So if you find people to whom that appeals, you are more likely to find long-term subscribers because they enjoy the entire Eve experience, not just this game has that gameplay for 1 week of the year for them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me just say that we have a bunch of new people in here now inside this conversation. They're running for CSM. You'll see Killa B. You'll know his voice. You also have CSM, Cable, and Lizard Lizbreath, all joining us now, and Asteros Khan from Usher Khan. So you guys are all welcome to speak. It's a discussion. And let me just answer Apotheny real quick. I think you're right. I think the key to longevity in EVE Online is finding an interest to do the next thing. So once you get good at a thing and you kind of master it, then you want to be able to extend your knowledge into the next gameplay, right? So that could be for, say, a PvPer. You could say, I'm really good at this now. Let me figure out how to go that next step and how to scan, how to scan for ships and stuff like that. Or let me figure out how to do this in wormhole space or whatever. But you start to create, you start to move into the next thing. Or let me figure out how to build my own ships. Sorry about that. All right, guys, you guys are welcome to talk. Sorry I had you on mute so long. I didn't realize you guys were in here because the window was buried. There is another question if nobody's going to talk, and that is, we talked about botting a bit in Schnoodle's stream. I don't know who Schnoodle is, the other day, and one suggestion was to have a wormhole type local in all the systems without NPC stations. So wormhole type local, I think, is a delayed local, which means that unless somebody talks, you don't actually see them inside the local chat.
Yeah, I mean, that's a choice you can make with the game. It does make it does make the current systems used to bot harder, because obviously they rely quite heavily on local. But death to bots in the ways, but
really death to bot. We should talk about botting because it's controversial and it's kind of funny to see people the directions they come at it. Actually, go ahead.
It's that I think botting will always be a thing, and it is always bad for the game. But if you are making changes specifically to make botting harder, I don't think you can just go, okay, this change will make botting harder, so let's do it. You also have to consider the wider aspects of what that change does. And I think that's something CCP are doing in this case. So, for example, what if people who play in null-sec like having that local, for whether that's because it makes the game easier or not, because it makes players' lives easier as well as bots' lives easier, at least for those like doing stuff in that space.
Yeah.
Like obviously it would hurt bots a lot, but obviously it also affect players in certain ways. And is that a direction CCP wants to take the game?
I think what they're saying there is, like, if a hunter comes into a system and it doesn't automatically register that he's there, then he will get a chance to kill that bot that can't detect him. Because I think bots run on local. So they see who enters the system. When somebody enters a system, then it finds safety. So the reason botting is so bad is because, first of all, your efficiency goes up tremendously, because you're not a human sitting at a desk having to put in all those hours. It's the computer working itself. But also the safety mechanism. You're not going to get killed because there are defensive macros that it runs. When it sees somebody enter system, it goes and hides. And so it always gets safe. So you have very, very little risk, and you have great reward because it's constantly working and it's constantly getting itself safe when something happens. If this were even a thing where you could automate something, but somebody could come in and destroy it, then you have a cost benefit analysis to work with. But if it's, efficiently able to hide and efficiently able to make ISK while you're away doing your schooling or doing your job, then that seems to be you're outperforming players without actually outplaying them. And that's why botting is such a big deal to players. It gets them mad in a way that it seems like something unfair is happening that they can't control, and that CCP doesn't appear to want to control. And that's why they take it out on CCP, because CCP should be the ones to say, yeah, we have tools to find these guys because we can see their repetitive actions. Well,
and it devalues the reward of the thing. If you have 10 people mining gold, I'm trying to use very generic terms, then gold might be a very rare commodity unless it's high value. If you have 100,000 bots mine gold, there's tons and tons of gold in the market, so that if you're a person who logs on to do half an hour of gold mining, then you're making nothing just because laws of supply and demand.
Right.
Well, it's also a question of inflation in general.
Yeah, exactly that.
Yeah. More apt description. It's essentially inflation, and that's what it is.
Now,
I mean, one of the bigger problems we're seeing, though, is also the fact the use of alpha accounts to do the botting, because CCP decided to increase the availability of skills on alpha accounts. I think that played very well into the hands of the people using botting.
We had CCP on, the security team for CCP was on Talking in Stations, and we talked about it, and they were like, botting's bad. Yes, we get it, right? It's unfair. It does these things like devalue your work. But account hacking is terrible. It is terrible because it ties them up trying to untangle who legitimately got hacked and everything stolen and how they can retrieve all that stuff. It's a terrible, terrible time chunk for them. So that's their priority. That's their big priority. Plus, account hacking really it's a devastating event if it happens to you and somebody takes all your stuff, all your hard-earned work. That's a player that's basically knocked out of the game. So that's where their focus has been, and that to me seems appropriate. That is much worse than botting. Botting is a perceptual falling behind, whereas account hacking is a devastating attack on players.
I entirely agree on that one, I got to say.
Yeah,
but at the same time, it has to be like a balance. There has to be like a split focus, because if you focus entirely on one and then just let the other one run rampant, then the overall game will still be affected on that sense. So you have to really find a balance. And I understand that, and I agree entirely that getting hacked would be fucking horrible. And I have a friend who actually got hacked, and he's still not in the game because he doesn't have the credit card number for the very first car that was used to pay for the account, which was like 6 years ago, and he couldn't remember the numbers or anything about it, obviously, so he can't get his account.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I've heard some funny things about botting recently, like whose responsibility is it, and is it the CCP's responsibility, or is it the player's responsibility to clean it up? And if it's happening in these renter sections, which the pie chart revealed that a lot of it happened in drone regions that are very, very hard to attack, and it's hard to get out there, basically. So people kind of left alone out there.
Well, I mean,
the jump
CCP's
distances.
job to remove them, but any player that makes it harder for CCP to do that job is at fault, and I think a fairly serious fault. So I think that so I posted a thread ages and ages ago on Reddit after the whole taboo, where Matani said something along the lines of, don't report botters, report them to your alliance leaders or whatever. And it's like, no, you report bots to CCP, and CCP are the ones who should be organizing it. And whether or not CCP are good at doing that, you always send it to CCP. And if CCP are bad at doing that and it makes the game worse, that should affect your decision to play the game. You should at no point remove CCP from the equation and send it to another player to sort out. I believe that very strongly.
By the way, Modem Fox says in chat here that my account was hacked. All they did for me, he's talking about CCP, was give me a bunch of SP skill points. None of my stuff was replaced. And I think that points to how difficult it is for them to audit where all the stuff went and get it back for you. So all they can do is offset the damages and hope that you're happy enough to stick around. So I imagine you are if you're here. Good for you.
I mean, I kind of understand though the CCP's problem, because giving back items to players because they were hacked, I understand that would be like the best case scenario for the player, but the problem is that CCP can't just generate new items to replace the lost ones if they can't track where they went, because that would again skew the whole what's it called, inflation of items essentially. Because can we just create another 2 Titans because this person had them? Or, like, it would just make things worse to an extent.
Sure. And you can't put anything past EVE players, even in the meta. They will meta play against CCP as well, stealing from each other and then claiming they've had things stolen and that kind of stuff. You have Crazy Dog here. It says, is there any information that there is more botting now compared to like 10 years ago? That's a very good question. And I'm not sure. I would have to ask someone who watches this sort of thing, like Noisy Gamer, if he could put some statistics together so that we could look at what it's like. The thing about botting 10 years ago is, of course, there was a lot more gray area because you could do multiple broadcasting macros as a player. But what I do remember is even in 2009, there was a lot of there was a big effort to clear out a lot of botters, and they would take them out. And you can see on the analytics of finances in EVE, you can see the big dips where a chunk of botters were removed, and it's not that they were removed and they made less money, it's that all their money was confiscated as well. And so you see these giant dips. Well, they're not giant in the grand scheme of things, but you see these little dips that are actually giant amounts of money that have been deleted from the game because they were people violating the rules. So I don't know if it's better or worse. I think if you look at the population of the game, we used to say, oh, EVE has so many people online, this is great, but it's too bad that 25% of them are botters. So actually having less people playing the game, technically we might actually have the same population in EVE Online, but because they've been so effective at removing botters, and botters extend onto RMTers, that it looks like the population is less, but actually they just cleared away a lot of the robots. I've always thought about that kind of balance. I would like to know. Maybe CCP can actually come up with that. But to answer your question, we don't know. We don't have the tools to know. And only CCP can tell us if they want to tell us. CSM would know because they could ask, and they might get that answer.
Might being the key word.
Yeah, like none of us except Killa B, who's in here, but he's looks like he's busy, have been on CSM, so we don't know what they can know and don't know, and they can't tell us because they're restricted by the agreement they sign. Okay, I'm looking for more questions, and I'm sorry if I missed your question. There was a lot of back roll there, but if you could write your question again if you didn't get it answered, I'd appreciate it. But I do want to point out a lot of contributing guys here, which is great, like Crazy Dog and Varag 101. Thank you guys for asking questions and participating and even answering questions for other people. Yikes. Okay. So a 10,000 player drop in 3 years relates to banning all bots. I doubt that was all of them, to be honest. Yeah. I'm not even putting that forward as something that happened at all. It's a speculation on, I wonder how much of the lower population is just better bot security from CCP. It would be interesting to know if there was a difference. Can't they avoid the majority of account hacking by adding two-factor authentication like most games do? Or do they already have it and I haven't checked it? Well, two things. Yes, you have two-factor authentication for EVE Online. If you don't have it on, you haven't turned it on. It's not mandatory, but it is available. And it is strongly recommended. And you do that on your accounts page. You don't do it in the game. You do it on the accounts page. Yep. It is not mandatory, though, so they don't make you do it. I think some places do. I forget. It might not be a game, but some other places do have mandatory stuff. Okay, so Liz, are you in here? Oh, unfortunately, we can't hear you. So if you were trying to talk this whole time, we couldn't hear you. I see you light up, but I don't. Sometimes people have audio problems with Discord. Thanks, Modem Fox, for the follow. Thank you, Doomyak, for the follow. LOL or Lole Roller, thank you for the follow. Liza Argil, you guys, your names. I'm terrible with names. Thank you for the follow. Slack7, the follow. Ron Swang Song, thank you for the follow. And Adam Mill, thank you for this subscription. 5 months. That is a dedicated TIS viewer. Thanks for the raid, Urslog. And thanks for the subscription, Vera. Berea. That's a new subscription. And Bard Ghost, 3 months. Thanks, buddy. He is a friend of TIS and is on often. Okay, so what you've been watching is footage from a move up from the Imperium moving up north. They're moving to... I wanted to use this new map. This is eveI.com. It's a friend of ours, and he does a great job with maps. They're a little hard to view because we're so used to Dotlan and maybe the physical maps that were printed by CCP a long time ago. But these are worth getting good at to figure out where things are. They're laid out differently, and they have some really cool powers. I won't demonstrate it, but check it out for yourself and explore it. It's a really neat program. But let me get to something more familiar to you guys so you can see that 6RC is where the Imperium is now. And if we do jumps, or let's see, NPC kills planet. Let's look at vulnerability cycles. Well, from what we know already, and I'll have to go out to a bigger map here so you can see the full scale map. Okay, so can you see a mouse? Can't see a mouse, unfortunately. Let me see if I can get the mouse to work. Sometimes it's in properties. And then I can point to things, and that would help. And I don't see how that's happened. Yeah, so it'll be hard for me to point to things, unfortunately. Anyway, the Imperium has moved up their entire super capital fleet, leaving Delve exposed or undefended. And what's supposed to happen is the people in Delve are not supposed to be doing anything, right? If you're not on deployment, you're not with the group, then you're on your own. There's no protection for you in Delve right now. And Horde and Volta have made the best of that, and they put down a bunch of structures so they could start attacking things in the south. Now, from what I understand, that's not a counter invasion. It's a harassment to try to pick off people who are mining and stuff. And from the Imperium perspective, they deserve to get killed down there, even though they're their own guys, because they shouldn't be trying to mine when there's no protection. So if they die, and they don't really care about it. It's all personal money anyway. It's just less taxes for the state. That's the only way it hurts the Imperium. However, if you start seeing things get reinforced, then you might start to see a little more attention being paid to that. So we'll have to see. In the meantime, the Imperium is actually up here in Pureblind, which is right next to Tribute, next to Fate. And I believe they're an NPC Pureblind, which if we take a look at NPC Pureblind. So they're in 6RC. So they're one system over in, so here's Tribute. There's Pureblind. 6R, where are you? You go back.
Can you actually hear me now?
There you are. Yeah.
I hate Discord.
Yeah. Okay. So let me rephrase that. They're actually let me not rephrase it, but let me correct that. They're actually in Cloud Ring on the border of Fade. So they're in this system here. This is their staging system, 6RCQ. And that is where the invasion will launch. We expect them to go into Fade and Pure Blind. This Fade is very small. As you can see, it's basically a pipe. A pipe means basically one way in, one way out. And so you can gate camp those really well. So pipes are places that can be locked down pretty well. At least in the past they could. Now interceptors can get right through bubbles. But in the past, if you lived in a place with a lot of pipes, that meant you were heavily camped or hunted. Those are not good places. Which, interestingly enough, is why Syndicate was the home of Goonswarm a long time ago, because they figured out that if you look here at Syndicate, if you look in the top right, that's Goon's what do you call it? Traditional home, right? And the reason is it's hard to camp. It's a big cluster. So there's one way in, but there's two or more ways out. And that means it's harder to camp because you have to cover two gates instead of one. Whereas if you look at other parts of Syndicate, like this long pipe here in the middle, you only have to camp the out gate or the in gate in order to get some kills. And so that's why this is it's a really good spot to be in. And let's see who's in there right now under sovereignty. I would guess there's no sovereignty to choose from, but I guess that's where you might see initiative. I'm not sure. Not being an initiative. But yeah, so that's an interesting strategy. Null-sec or space is not all the same. There's definitely some geography to it. And that's one of the advantages of having more of a cluster than a pipe. But going back to Fade, where they will be invading through, you can see that they can go right through it to Pure Blind. And Pure Blind's a bit bigger. And I think there was Triumvirate that was in Pure Blind. They've already, I've heard, moved out or are moving out, but they won't resist this irresistible force, which is essentially too many Titans, too many super caps coming at them. So the place will burn. There's no question about it. And I don't think there'll be many fights that the North will be able to take. It's too big. They're outnumbered. It's the same phenomenon that the Casino War, World War B was. There's too many. The numbers are too big. If you look back at history in 2000, was it 16 or 17? Or I think it was actually 2016. That's when, it was April 2016. So it was about 3 solid years ago was World War B, the Casino War. You saw pretty much everybody gang up on the Imperium. And when that happened, there was a significant fight. It wasn't a significant military objective, but it was a significant fight because the North showed that combined, they could out-blob Imperium, which was never the case. Imperium always had numbers like they do now. But at this point, there was enough people to overcome that. So the Imperium showed up to a fight against 1,200 people with 800 because that's all they could get. And that basically showed that the North could outperform them in gathering people to fight. So the next fight, Goonswarm and Imperium came more prepared, and they brought 1,200 to 1,400. But by that time, the news had spread that they could be outblobbed, and 2,400 people came to fight those 12 or 400. 1,200 or 1,400. So they were again outblobbed, and at that point, CO2, at that exact battle, CO2 switched sides, which made it even worse. And at that point, the Imperium basically collapsed. It was not a fun war, historic, but not fun. And I think you're seeing the same thing this time around. You're going to see the North will not be able to compete with the numbers that are being thrown at them. And the advantage of the smaller groups in the past was that they had stronger ships, bigger ships, and they knew how to use them. But the amount of titans and the amount of super capitals that are in the north you cannot overcome that with northern defenses. So we'll see what happens there. Yeah, so I don't like these lopsided fights. It's not up to me to like them. It doesn't matter. It's all history. But I don't enjoy fighting in these very much. I didn't enjoy World War B at all. And I won't enjoy this either. I just think it's terrible gameplay. I like to see I like to see interesting wars. I don't know about you guys.
I think we all like interesting wars.
Yeah, so Cheetah reminds me of something. I guess if it's not clear for people who don't know that much about EVE Online, Imperium were the ones that were holding the North at the time when they were invaded, and this is kind of a counter invasion. Funny enough, for me, which was interesting, and we covered this on Talking at Station Sunday, is Sword Dragon's role of essentially stepping out of the way. Like, don't get me involved in your fight. Goonswarm is after tribute. Why is Goonswarm after tribute? Okay, so the leaders of Imperium, which is the whole coalition, is Goonswarm. Goonswarm has a hate boner for NC. Why? NC is led by Vince Draken, and Vince, or Draken, Vince has assembled essentially the groups that wanted to exterminate Goonswarm from the game in 2006. So this is like a decade-long rivalry. So essentially it's old Bob, but a lot of those players are gone. So it's definitely not all the same players, but the same leadership, or nearly the same leadership. So yeah, so you have that rivalry going. And so Goonswarm has always wanted to kill Bob in the form of NC. So in BTAC R in 2014, gosh, which was 5 years ago if you think about it, the Imperium or the Goonswarm was really not happy with the result because they wanted to kill NC, but they ended up killing PL. A lot of the Titans that were killed there were PL, and they had trapped PL. NC wasn't trapped. So they let PL go. A sign of goodwill, or some kind of money was traded. Who knows what that was, but they basically let him go because their fight really wasn't with Pandemic Legion. Pandemic Legion actually used to be allies with Goonswarm. So they had some ties and some history and stuff like that. But I know that if NC gets trapped, there won't be any mercy. It's very much a hate war between Goonswarm and NC. So this is their chance, because when they came up north in 2018, and by they I mean Imperium came up north in 2018, they ravaged a lot of the area, but they really didn't touch Tribute, which was NCPL territory. They really ravaged Pureblind. Let's see if I can show you. The sectors in the north here, Fade, Pureblind, those places were the ones that were burned down mostly. And so you had Horde kind of vacating the area because it was too small for them. They were in Fade, but they also needed to get out of the way of Sword Dragon because they were basically being a meat shield for Sword Dragon and Darkness, which was in Decaline. So they got out of there and started their own thing over on the other side in Geminate, which is near the Forge, right? The blue area here. I wish I could point. Dang it. I'll figure out how to get that. So they took off and they vacated Fade Pureblind area, and that was taken over by CO2. Really hurt CO2 because CO2 lost their leader technically. So it was hard for them. And they lost a lot of members to NC. Right? So they came into Fade and Pureblind, and they defended the area for a while, but they eventually got demolished as well. And they ended up retreating to Melpace. Which is over in the drone regions. So it seems like that's a recovery center. Triumvirate's there now. CO2 is over there too. at one point after getting beat out of the North. But this time it's different, because this time I think, this time it's different, and I'll explain why. But let me go back a bit to 2018. The progress was that the Imperium was attacking Fade and Pureblind and had essentially pacified the area and was going to break into the north. And everybody everybody from the south was ready for that. They wanted that victory, right? That's what they wanted. But a deal was struck with Sword Dragon and Duckline to cease hostilities. And there's a lot of talk about that. And that was negotiated by Aerith, who's the finance minister for Goonswarm. Did he do that with the full cooperation of the FCs? Were the FCs burned out and saying, yeah, we're really tired, we can't go much further, our supply lines are too stretched, we need to relax, so go ahead and make the deal? Or did Aerith make the deal, say this is a good deal, we should take it? And was it decided whether the FCs wanted to continue or not, to go back home and to take this deal and to take a break and to do other things? And that's always been a question. What was the nature of that deal really? Because some people say it was basically the FCs kind of yanked back. They didn't really want to overextend. I think Matani's good at that. He doesn't overextend the Imperium. I've never seen him overextend the Imperium. If anything, he underextends the Imperium. In the Halloween War, when they were in BTAC-R, they won BTAC-R, and they didn't come in and ravage the place. They actually withdrew after trying to kill Nully. They withdrew back to Fountain. You also saw that in a few campaigns between Fountain and Delve when they were in the north. You've seen it over and over again as a propensity not to overextend. Where they did overextend, they got hurt, and that is when the rules changed and they were sitting on a lot of property in the north that they couldn't really actually handle. They left themselves a lot of space, even though they said we're going to give up 3 regions. We're going to give up Delve and Fountain, and we're going to turtle up in the north, and we're going to protect the north. Well, they were still too big for what they could actually handle. That was the one time they were overextended, but they didn't overextend themselves. The game changed under them, and they were overextended. And they tried to contract a little bit so they could protect the territory that they had, but they still had too much territory. And that's when you saw the invasion of the North in 2016, World War B. It's called World War B, or Casino War. You saw that war show that they were overextended and they collapsed. So you don't see that mistake happen a lot. You certainly don't see a deliberate mistake like that. Now, why is that different? Because this time, I think this is a big push that Mittani wants to go into tribute and to ravage the place right into the heart of their enemy and to destroy as much as they can. And I don't think there's any... I don't think they're going to let up until they really destroy a lot of things. It's not going to be exciting, and it might be boring, and they're going to be heavily overextended, and that will be interesting to watch. But I don't think there's any doubt that they're going to be able to destroy a lot of structures that are still up, which is why you saw ANC take down a lot of structures before Imperium moved north. It's kind of the nature of the game, and that's really where we're at. But we'll have to see. I think things may change in an interesting way when technology changes, because right now a head-on collision with essentially not 1,000 super capitals is not playable gameplay. And if you do attack that, you're going to have a 9-TAC-4 with 6,000 people in a system, and you're going to have servers choke. They may have improved things, which would be great, but I still think you'll see servers choke when it gets to these big fights. And that is dangerous territory for them to be in, because there's a lot more guns from Imperium shooting at a lot fewer targets on the north, NCPL. So you don't want to do that. Yeah, so this is going to be different in that they're going right at NC dot. They're not going at PL necessarily. They're leaving Sword Dragon alone because he's not getting in the way. And Triumvirate is not able to handle any kind of buffer state in Fate or Pureblind, so they're already making plans to retreat. So that's kind of what's going on in this region up here. And I think over the next month or so, you'll see a lot of damage being done to the north. At the same time, you'll see stuff happening in Delve, and I do not know if you'll see structural changes in the south, though. You may just see people getting caught in expensive ships and destroyed. But they are racking up an impressive amount of damage in Delve. I think if we go to kills, that's places. So let's see if we can see kills. You have to go into systems, but we'll go to Z kill board. Not a place I go to that often because I feel like kill boards don't matter, but and I'm looking for, they don't have regions, they just have systems, I think. Someone has an open mic. I'll have to close it for you. Warp drive active. Yeah. I don't know where a lot of these ships are coming from. We can just check. Yeah, this one was killed in Goon Swarm space. So Snuff actually took out Goon Swarm Titan in 1DQ, which is their headquarters. So yeah, they are not protected. Okay, good. There are region kills. Let's see. I guess I could just type it in, right? There's a Delve region. Yes, thank you. Okay, wasn't sure if that was available. I don't use this. I don't use this very often because I don't do research anymore like I used to. Yes, and then you can narrow down the higher stuff. So we'll do the top. Oops, losses. These are the most valuable everything. So let me go back to Delve. So most valuable kills in the last 7 days in Delve. Yeah, it looks like Titans and Supers. So yeah, you're gonna have those things destroyed, whether they're trying to catch up to the Titans and Supers that left earlier or not. They may just be there. Hey, thanks for the subscription, man. Thanks. I'm a Desk. I like that name. Well, yeah, so anyway, it's a bunch of small stuff. I don't know if this is going to make a difference, right? You're not going to hear the Imperium say like, "Ooh, we're getting attacked down there." They're going to laugh it off, whether it hurts them or not. And there, thanks for that link. All right, that's what I was looking for. Well, but that's all time. I would like to see like the last few days. So, and May is too big a time span. So, well, anyway, you get the idea. Maybe I'll develop stats for this sort of thing. But I do think with the counterattack going on in Delve, I'm reluctant to call it a counterattack, with the harassment campaign going on in Delve, remains to be seen how effective that'll be at doing anything. I don't think it'll be effective. And even if it is effective, I don't think it's going to draw the Imperium back down south to defend themselves. If there was something more substantial, if there were super capitals in the theater, if Test was to turn on them, for instance, and start to burn down their region, then you might see something like that happen. But I don't think so. And this is where good diplomacy helps you defend yourself while you're deployed. The way that other groups avoid this problem is they don't have territory to destroy. So Pandemic Legion, they took the mercenary lifestyle because they didn't want to have to run home to defend stuff. And Imperium has done the opposite. They have home territory. They have an empire that they built. So when they leave it to go march on a different province, basically, their home has to be gated up. And that's how that works. Oh, Suetonia. Where is Suetonia? Where art thou, Suetonia? You know, it's funny. As Talking in Stations, as you know, a broadcaster, we don't really pick sides, either in the game or CSM. But because CSM is more about players than it is about sides, it was a little more open to say, this is who we think would be good on CSM. And TIS doesn't have any favorites, right? But I do, as Matterall, and even as the head of TIS, I was reluctant to really say anybody should vote for anybody because I have too many friends, and if I say vote for these 10 guys, then I've left 10 off, and they're gonna be mad. So I never did that until until the first election of Suetonia. Then I said, like, I don't care who you vote for, but you should at least put Suetonia in. That was the only endorsement I think I've ever made, and it was Suetonia, because to me he's like a CCP Fozzie in that he has a photographic memory about this game, and he's able to really call up facts and combinations, and he's already tried things that you might come up with in theory and stuff, and he's just somebody who knows a lot about the nuts and bolts of the statistics of the game, which are good. There are people like him in different disciplines, but as far as running for CSM, it was Suetonia was an easy choice for me to endorse last year, or was it the year before? It was his first year. All right, here's a question. Oh, it's not a question. He's answering something. So do you guys have any questions for me? If not, I want to wrap up because I will wrap up early. I started early and I can wrap up early. That was 2 hours ago. I think we've been streaming for... Nope, we've been streaming for 1 hour, 40 minutes. And I'll look real quick on... Okay, thanks guys for... This is great. I appreciate the help. Always. When we do live broadcasts, I really appreciate the help because it's hard for me to keep talking and to keep the dead air away and giving relevant information. And so I really heavily rely on people who are on the battlefield sending me links saying, you know, this is what we're seeing and stuff like that. And that is a great relationship, right? The players are bringing information in. I'm broadcasting information so that other players can hear that. And it's just wonderful to see that kind of cooperation. And that's actually what Talking Station does a lot of. We have the people who do work for us or are on crew are people who know stuff and are also receivers of information, like Ron USMC there. He does live coverage, and so he's getting information from other people and he's able to broadcast it out. And that's what it's all about, is getting the word out about what's going on in EVE Online, right? So somebody's asking me, Varela, and I will answer this because they are, or he or she is a new subscriber. So I'm very pleased to answer any question you have. Did you evacuate your stuff from Tribute? So he's talking to me because I'm an NC dot. Did I evacuate my stuff from Tribute? I did not evacuate my stuff from Tribute because I don't actually live in Tribute. I have my warships there, and that's all I have there. And those are I'm always willing to lose them, whether they be a Titan or a destroyer. I'm willing to lose those ships, so I don't consider that getting them to safety a priority. But what I do consider my treasure is my blueprint collection and my my industrial supplies, because I like the industrial game very much. So that stuff I always keep safe. I don't build in null-sec because I don't want to go through evacuations. Evacuations, I don't know if you've ever been through one, but are very demoralizing and very sad. Not only are they inconvenient, but they're morale killing, you know. So I try to keep myself from having my morale killed by not it's kind of funny, by not having stuff at risk. It's kind of like I'm not in a relationship because I don't want my heart broken. So I'll never get into a relationship because I don't want heartbroken. It's kind of silly, but you know, when you've already had 2 or 3 marriages, it doesn't really matter that much, I guess. I guess that's a way of putting it. All that is fictional, just an analogy for the way I play EVE Online. Let me ask Cable, are you still here with me?
Yes, sir.
So what's your story? I haven't read your thing yet, but you know, why don't you tell us what you're about? I won't ask you any questions or opinion or anything. I just want to.
What do you mean by what am I about?
Where are you from? Who do you fly with? That kind of thing.
I am from Denmark, tiny little country above Germany, and
with no accent.
I know I sound American, right?
Yeah, is that practiced or are you American in Denmark?
No, I just picked up on the accent as a little one, and then it kind of just stuck. I fly with We Form Volta, and am a director in Volta itself.
Great.
And
Great.
I'm also an FC for them.
Volta's great.
So it is.
Great players. Well, I should say effective. I don't know what you guys are like, but you guys are effective combatants, at least. It's neat to see what you guys are up to. Well, here's a question. We can both answer it. And Liz can too if she wants. But Astraeos is here with us. Astraeos Khan. He's from Usher Khan. And he asks, Matterall, do you have any ideas to change level 4 Faction War missions to make it more impressive gameplay? Same question for Faction War plexes. And if so, how would you change it? That question is for me. I'll answer it, but Cable, if you want to have a shot at it, you can too.
I will hand to God say I have no idea about faction warfare whatsoever. It's one of the very few things that I've not tried in the game, really. Well, I tried it an hour and then got bored to death and then left.
Yeah. Well, you're not the only one, right? Faction war is one of those things that it's almost like wormhole space that people don't really. They're kind of. There's kind of a small group, I guess, or a specialized group that
I feel
really
like
knows
it's something where it's like either you love it or you hate it from the start.
Right. And I've heard people say that low-sec really is just faction war space. Like, so low-sec hunters go into faction war to find people to hunt and kill, but they're not necessarily playing the faction war game. They're just kind of hunting around through there. But to answer your question, Astraeus Khan, let me... you're unmuted, right? So you're here with us? Oh, nuts. We can't hear you. So you might want to check your audio. Do I have any ideas? Yeah. Now I can hear you.
Just to give a brief description of faction warfare missions. At the moment right now, it's just the same copy and paste mission style that you get in high sec missions, except in most cases you could either run them in stealth bombers or tactical destroyers because they're really easy. They're very simple as far as the mechanics goes. But they're good because they're a really good source of income. If you do it for probably a couple of hours, you can make a bill in a day.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason I feel that it needs to be changed is it's immensely boring. Most people find it very dull, and it's also which causes people to get burnt out in faction warfare. So I guess just to describe the question a little bit better than what I did in the chat boxes, if you had a way to change the missions, what would you change in them, and how would you? And the same question for the plexes themselves. Plexes are very boring. You go into a plex, you sit there for 30 minutes. You can or cannot get PvP, but at the same time, it's very dull.
Yeah.
So I guess what would you do to change that mechanic also?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't change that mechanic. CCP would change that mechanic. How would I influence CCP to change that mechanic? In no particular way, except that to say, what you're looking at. Like this gameplay is not very exciting. So what it may take is something along the lines of a balance pass or a new mechanic or something like that. But that isn't even what I would advise CCP to do, right? This is a very concrete example of something an area that needs a little bit of love and some development work. But essentially you're looking at a balance pass that might make it fun. The bigger question for me is, why are you making money? And that is a question for you. Why do you want to make money there? Like you said, you can make up to $1 billion, and that seemed like a good thing. But why is that a good thing?
Well, to be honest, just a PvP.
Right.
And that is a driving force. But at the same time, faction warfare, one week it could be like ice hot fire, and there's fights every day. And then as soon as the losing side gives up, well, there's just nothing to do but to farm, really. So another thing would be, how would you change the overall faction warfare mechanic as a whole? Because right now it's a tug and war thing. You either are pushing one side to the other side of the map, or the other side's pushing you. And once they get to that point, I mean, that's it.
Yeah.
There's nothing else to do.
Well, it seems designed to do both things, right? Like it's a place that you can go and you can make something of a passive income. It's a little more active than passive, right? Because you have to fly the ship and do the thing, but you might not get a fight, so you're just kind of doing missions and farming the plexes. Do you still fly around them?
Well, yes, we run fleets pretty much every day, and we fly and we roam. It's getting to the point where a lot of the Mimitar guys don't actually even want to like flex and defend because it's such a massive burnout. But yes, we look for PvP.
Yeah, it seems like you're grinding for, like there's a possibility of PvP, but you're also making money, but it's still all PvP centric. And what I would say is that I think there's some missed opportunities here with Faction War. I think Faction War was supposed to be what RVB is, right? It is, and it may be serving that purpose. It may not. It sounds like sometimes it's not. Where you get into the game, you have a little bit of time, and you really just want to get into a fight. And that was what Faction War was supposed to be, like a place where you could get into a brawl because you were on one side of a team, without having to do all the work that's involved with being part of a corporation, like turning over all your turning over all your information to them, being monitored by them, doing what they ask you to do as part of the team, showing up for fleets or getting a lot of pressure to show up for fleets. There's a lot of commitment to PvP for corporations, for alliances, for coalitions that you could bypass by just saying, I'm not working for anybody. I'm just playing my game, and I'm going to jump in there with maybe 3 or 4 guys and do some faction war stuff and maybe pick up a couple of combat missions or actually get into a few PvP fights here and there.
Well, if I may interrupt, faction warfare was never like this. Back before they made the station, before they released Citadels, probably about 6 years plus. The mechanics were, if you lost that system, you couldn't dock in those stations. So there was an incentive to fight, because basically, if you lost that station, you lost all your assets. You would have to move them out. Now it's not so much controlling the systems. As far as our focus in Mimitar, it's about removing enemy structures, because, well, sure, we can take the whole war zone, but it doesn't really matter. Most people could either just asset safety to another citadel, or they could just put them in citadels themselves.
Yeah. So the structures have really hurt that kind of gameplay, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And that has been a sore spot, I think, for Faction War. It's it has devalued other things. And that's where I would say, look, CCP, you have an unintended consequence against Faction War with Citadels. Yeah, you let people put them up everywhere. You can also put them up in high sec, where you couldn't do that before without permission, but permission took standings. You had to get standings, or you had to pay someone to get standings for you. So it created a profession for a player that wasn't in the game, and it was emergent gameplay. And that kind of stuff is all, what do you call it? Collateral damage from structures and the freedom to put structures everywhere you want. So my advice to CCP is not to say, hey, be more careful, because that's impossible, right? You have to just kind of consider a lot of different things and hope that players talk about things. But it's more about, you missed a big opportunity here. you have faction wars. You have the empires at war. What does that look like? What does it mean? And how do you make that something that is viable for players that want to play casual, or actually just don't want to put the burden on themselves to be responsible to these other players all the time, right? Like the fact that this sucks makes people gravitate towards null-sec, in my opinion. If this didn't suck as bad, there might be an alternative to getting your PvP and your PvE and feeling that progress without having to go into Goon Swarm or Karma Fleet or wherever everybody else wants you to go.
Well, the thing about the faction warfare community is most of us aren't even casuals. A lot of us play hardcore. You've got faction warfare guys who do a lot of industry stuff, 24 hours a day, dual boxing 8 characters. You've got a lot of Amarian corps who are just diehards. They do stuff all the time, and if they're not in faction warfare space, they're doing RP stuff and null-sec. So as far as like fleet ops, fights, and actual activity, faction warfare is very active. And it kind of sucks because most of the time we're not even in the actual faction warfare space. We go do other stuff otherwhere. And also another thing about, sorry, what was the other point that you had brought up?
I brought up like 4 points, but it was a missed opportunity to do your PvP and your PvE if you were a casual player. I'm glad you're pointing out that it's not just for casuals, it's for people who really want to fight all the time. I guess RVB was the same way, right? RVB was for people who wanted just to find that fight. They didn't want all the politics. They didn't want all the information giving to people that were going to monitor you. They just wanted to get in and get a fight with another player. So faction war could be that, or it should be that, but but I'm not sure that it is. It could also be a place to get you involved with. You're an Usher Khan, I noticed. Usher Khan is something of a lore-based corporation, right? You guys, I don't know how strict you are about lore, but you guys have that in your background.
We used to be a little bit stricter, but not as strict as we used to be.
But you have that window dressing, right? Like you guys, not that you guys talk like Brutors or anything, but you guys are Minmatar based, and you're like that plays into it a little bit. And
exactly.
I'm not sure that CCP's done enough to make that matter, right? We've known that when you first join EVE Online, or when you did first join EVE Online, it mattered because there was different empires, had different styles, had different ships, and none of that matters.
Because I've actually been noticing a little while back when they had those NPCs roaming in low-sec, like I kind of think they were testing things out. And they do a lot of lore events, kind of see a little bit of what Usher Khan's been doing. The other day we had that whole fight with the Concord officer where he was telling us to... actually, hold on one second. I think I might have the kill mail. But it was the whole Connie slave revolt. I don't know if you heard about.
Yeah, I haven't heard about the slave revolt unless it has to do with them being able to get that Vitalk out of their system stuff. Oh, how long ago was the slave revolt? It might be the same thing that I'm thinking of.
It was probably about a couple of months ago.
Yeah, okay.
And there was this CCP dev who had came in and he was role playing as a Concord officer, but he didn't have any defenses, and we kind of just aggroed him and blew up his mark.
Yeah, I did hear about that. Do you have a link to that or anything you can give me? So I can put it up?
I'm pulling it up now. 1 second.
Yeah, that was interesting. I didn't get the full story on. Oh, I thought I was putting that in a search. Let's see if I can find it.
I know it's on Reddit, but I can't find the actual link at the moment. I'm sorry.
It's okay. Don't worry about it. Oh. Well, this was last year, so I don't think this is the same thing. But anyway, I'll put up that art. That looks pretty cool. The point that I'm making is, how would I fix missions? I wouldn't fix missions, and I wouldn't know how to fix missions, because that to me seems like a game designer area, right? The game designer will figure out, like, how do we get these missions to work right, and with player input, right? And you get that either through CSM, or you get that through surveys of players who are in those areas, right? But you find out the player reaction to changes that you can make to fix those things. That's how that would be fixed. What I would want to do, though, is to put some pressure on CCP to prioritize that kind of thinking. That, look, you have factions in the game that are NPC, and sometimes people don't want to be responsible to other players to hold all their personal data, and they don't want to be called to do all these CTAs. They actually just want to play the game a little bit and be in an immersive environment that's very science fiction and has some lore to it, has some backstory. So why not spend some time thinking about faction war and how you can make it more interesting and more playable than the way it stands now? And I don't mean just mechanics, but by making standings mean more, making decisions about your race in the game and who you ally with mean more. I think that would be an interesting place to start to build a little more gameplay. And I also think that yes, the big stories and the big epic stories that players make are something that is genuinely interesting to read about, especially if they're described well. I'm a big story guy. I love the big stories. I love telling people those stories and finding the nuance and the human behavior in it, because I think that's a very important part of it. But I also think that EVE Online can be played without all the top personalities, right? Like, if you wanted to get involved in interesting stories as well, there should be interesting NPC stories as well to get involved with. There should be interesting stories in different parts of the game that aren't the same people at the top talked about over and over and over again. So that's how I would handle that. I don't have a faction war fix. I think you need a faction war response to an open CCP who's willing to look at that. Now, they may look at the statistics and say, well, we only have like 5% of the people playing faction war, therefore we're not going to hire devs to fix that. And it would be hard to argue that unless you argue on a different level. It's not the players that are here, it's the players that might come if you fix that thing. You've spent a lot of time talking about null-sec, publicizing null-sec, and guess what? You got a lot of null-sec players, or players coming to play null-sec. Why? Because you cultivated that. So I think it's not just the players that are here, it's the potential players that can come if you put some work into that area of the game. I think Abyssal stuff is a nice example of really good game development. I think they've really connected it to other parts of the game. At the same time, they've made it played as a group and as a solo player. It's a little more interesting. It's a little more challenging. All that is very good. But I think they have a lot of work to do with some of the stuff they've left behind that fits into the backdrop of the entire game. Okay, so we have a couple more questions. Actually, we should wrap up soon, but I have a couple more questions, so we'll see what we do here. Yeah, it's 2 hours. So, yeah, so Victor Fell says there was a time that faction mattered. That seems long ago. Yeah, and I think they did that for expediency's sake. I mean, a lot of the game has been moving faster and faster, right? A lot of the stuff that you had to do in EVE Online took a long time to do, and it took a lot of labor to do, and the decisions you made were permanent, and there was a certain scarring. Like, you made errors, but the errors were okay because everybody was making errors. And now it seems like there's so much knowledge, and everything is so streamlined, and so many things are done for you that really you get to a point where you don't want to waste time training the wrong skill. That seems like a terrible crime, you know. And at the time, it was just kind of like, oh, okay, well, maybe that'll be useful later, but you move on. And there was always an immersive aspect to your goals. Like, I'm going in this direction, so I'm whatever. But then you would pivot goals and go in a different direction. You would still have skills and training and corporations that you belong to that went in one direction. But that was okay because you were a branch now going in a different direction. And
having to get standings with
yeah,
specific factions. I think you mentioned in Matterall.
yeah, that's Victor
Having to
Felt.
actually get standings with a specific faction to anchor something. Taking
Sure.
that out or not employing it, one of the biggest mistakes ever.
Yeah, so to explain that, you could have a home, right? You could build a home in a POS, POS, player-owned station, or it's actually player-owned structure, wasn't it? Because it wasn't a station, so it's a player-owned structure. And the POS was your tower, and you could build parts, modules onto your tower to do the thing that you were trying to do, whether it was build a ship or refine asteroids or research blueprints. You could put the modules on the POS. But that was your little home. And the thing is, you couldn't really put that in Empire space without permission. You could put it in low-sec and you can put it in null-sec, no problem. In null-sec, no problem. In low-sec, you had to have some standing if it was, I think, below a certain threshold. But in high-sec, where you couldn't be attacked and your tower couldn't be attacked unless there was a declaration of war against you, you had to have permission. And to get permission was pretty tough. You had to get, I believe at the time it was points. So it was, the highest you could get is like an 8.0 on standings or something. So you would have to get a 6 or 7.0 just to be able to put down a POS, but only in the lower level Empire or lower level high sec. But to put into an area that had an 8, you had to have like really high standing. So the point was, you had to earn all this standing, or one of your characters had to earn all this standing to put down a structure in a safe area for you to have a home in space. And it was an interesting thing because not everybody did it because it was hard to do. It took a long time to do it, or it was expensive to do. And it was something that you could actually farm out. You could say, I can't do this. I don't have the time to do this. I'd have to run 100 missions to do this. So you hire somebody else to do it. Or you'd pay a fee to somebody who'd already done it, and they had a way of using the mechanics to give you permission to drop it, but you would pay them a fee. And I thought that was interesting gameplay. And cooperative. And it's the kind of thing that is interesting to people reading about EVE Online. There was a thing that somebody wanted to do, and they didn't want to do it, so somebody else came up with a clever way to fill in that gap and to do something. And that's immersive and emergent gameplay.
Another thing they had too, which I don't even know if it's still in the game, were the star-based charters, where if you had one, it would only last like for 1 hour for that pulse being on the moon. Remember those from back in the day?
Oh yeah.
So a lot of guys they would do faction warfare and just put those up for contracts and make money that way.
Yeah, all those little ways of making money. I love that. It felt like a fuller economy, right?
Yeah.
All we hear about now is how much mining you're doing with these rorquals and how many titans you've got in cooking and this kind of stuff. But all these little ways of making little bits of money and people putting their income together, like finding little ways to make income was interesting. The bigger guys, now I won't glamorize it, right? The past isn't glamorous. There was terrible stuff going on then too. But the lucrative moons were all kind of dominated by these power players, and they were making their money without having to do any work. They're just letting the drip, drip, drip of minerals coming off of moons collect for them, and then they would sell it at the market. And they'd get a bunch of money to fund their war efforts. But all these other guys are scraping together a living one way or another, finding niches to fill. There was one guy that would make clones for you. There was another group that would give you standings by running missions for you. There was another group that would allow you to take standings from them because they'd already run the missions. So they figured out how to transfer that standing to a single character that you would pay for. I think all that was interesting gameplay. Let me look for questions real quick, and then we'll call it a day. So people have suggestions for you, by the way, inside of chat, which is really nice of them, Asteros. So if you look in chat, you'll see some stuff. Yeah, okay. Well, why don't we wrap up? I don't see any questions, but I might be going over it really quickly, and I need to wrap up anyway. It's been 2 hours, even though we have a good fan base here with 120. I think we're up to 150 at one point. So it's good showing, but it is time to go.
And before 100 of them are bots. Ah!
Yeah. And by the way, bots aren't just making money doing missions or mining. There are also market bots, and nobody really talks about those, but those are devastating too, right? They kill that gameplay. One of the things that I talk about for CSM, and I hope I've given you an example of, here's a direct question that Asteros just asked. How do you fix this thing? And I'm not the kind of player that's going to say, I know how to fix that thing. I would have to be a player that played that all the time to do it as well, to give a recipe to CCP on how to fix it. Instead, I am more of a overview of EVE Online and where's the effort going, and should it go into all the constant tweaks for null-sec based characters, when there's a lot of, fixing one thing has effects on the ecosystem that is built around all the little parts that the mechanic fails at the time, right? So a lot of times you'll have CCP make a change that looks like it's a no-brainer and it's good for the game, and it ends up having a side effect that they didn't consider. And I'll give you one example of that. When they created the skill queue that lasted, well, more than 24 hours. First, they extended it to 1 year, and then they extended it forever. Or maybe it's capped at 1 year. But they then took away the habit of people logging in to make sure their skills were constantly changing. And that habit lowered the population. So it was not something they intended, but they did learn that habit is very powerful. People playing this game every day, checking in at least to check their skill queue, was something that allowed more activity to actually happen. And so then they thought, well, we need to fix that. How do we fix that? Well, we'll give everybody a daily mission. But then the side effect to a daily mission was you had this oppressive feeling that you were missing out, constantly losing because you weren't able to log in to do that daily mission, even though it was minuscule effort. The point was that they fixed something and it broke something else. They fixed that thing and it broke something else, because it's a very, very tricky game, because it's not one game, it's like 30 games all in one. And so what I'm saying to CCP, and I hope you guys vote for me at the number one position on your ballot, is to tell CCP, hey, you got more gameplay than just what's going on in null-sec. In fact, when you balance for null-sec, you're actually possibly creating side effects for other groups. And I would like to see CCP return to a more virtual world frame of reference rather than an actual video game. Because I think an actual video game is fun for groups of people for certain groups of people, but I think a virtual world is very attractive to players who are playing the game and who players who want to hear about the game and play the game. But it's not their cup of tea, because all the gameplay is wrapped up by all these perfected players who've already done it. And I think that's a big problem with CCP, with EVE Online, is it's been around so long that players look at it and say, that game's already sewn up. There are people who make how much money? That's incredible. I'll never make that much money. Or they have how many troops? Oh, that's incredible. We'll never be able to compete with them. And I think that's all a bad situation. Nobody gets into a game that's dying.
Death to capitals would solve.
So create new gameplay, create new things that people have to discover. Those are features that you can talk about. You have PR every 6 months on new features, and you create a place that basically people want to check out, and that's the first step in getting people to stay longer. And not only that, but as a player who's already here is kind of bored, kind of tired of the same old thing, can actually say, oh, I'm going to check out the new content, or they hear about it from other people doing it. So there's a sense of excitement about things constantly renewing. Okay. That's all I have time for, guys. Thanks for coming by. Appreciate it, everybody in this channel. And thank you very much out there for your questions and stuff like that. Remember, this weekend is Eve Down Under, and it's going to be pretty exciting. They will launch, I believe, the new expansion right after Eve Down Under. It's kind of been under-publicized, but hopefully we'll hear it.
Day.
What's that?
It's also announcement day for the candidates.
Yeah, and there's a CSM
Like
announcement day
official.
for candidates. Yeah, it just says who put in their paperwork properly and who CCP thought was okay to let run. There's some players that have put in paperwork properly, but they actually might get asked not to run because of their past, whether they were banned or they said some controversial things, or it could be anything. So, yes, but the official list will come out. Yeah. Sorry, Apollo, are you in here? Oh, you're not in here yet. Well, we almost got Apollo in here for an update, but we'll have to do that next or Thursday. Okay, guys, thanks very much for showing up today. And thanks to the guys that were here earlier. We will see you on Thursday for more Talking in Stations. Bye, guys. Appreciate it.